Buckle up, Bills Mafia, because things just got spicy in training camp, and not everybody is walking away happy. The Buffalo Bills squared off against the Cleveland Browns in a joint practice that started out looking like a nightmare, turned into a highlight reel, and ended with a giant flashing question mark hovering over one of the most important positions on the entire roster. If you thought training camp was just about jogging through drills in the summer heat, think again. This was a battle. This was a statement. And by the end of the day, there were winners, there were strugglers, and there was one veteran kicker who might want to double-check his internal clock before the games start counting for real. Let's start where the drama began, in the trenches. Buffalo rolled onto the practice field expecting to run the football, and Cleveland's defensive front had other plans. And look, this isn't some scrub unit we're talking about. Even without superstar Myles Garrett anymore, the Browns still trot out a front seven that commands respect across the league. You've got Jared Verse bringing disruption off the edge. You've got a rising force in Mason Graham clogging things up inside, and you've got a mix of grizzled veterans sprinkled in to make sure nobody gets comfortable. In the early periods, that front seven absolutely dominated the line of scrimmage. Gaps were clogged. Running lanes were non-existent. Buffalo's offensive line was getting a taste of adversity they hadn't really faced yet this summer. But here's the thing about championship-caliber teams. Adversity doesn't scare them, it wakes them up. After a rocky start, something clicked. The holes that were slammed shut in the first few team periods suddenly ripped wide open. James Cook, Buffalo's electric workhorse and one of the premier rushers in the entire NFL, started slicing through the Cleveland front like it wasn't there. He wasn't alone either. Depth backs got in on the fun too, busting off runs and reminding everyone why this Bills backfield is no joke. It was a full offensive line gut check, and by the second half of practice, Buffalo had completely flipped the script. One of Buffalo's offensive linemen summed up the mentality perfectly afterward, admitting that starting out rough was almost a blessing in disguise. Why? Because this is exactly the kind of adversity they're going to face throughout an actual NFL season. Nobody hands you easy yards in this league. You have to fight, claw, and grind for every single one, and when your offensive line can look back at a joint practice and say we got tested, and we came out on top, that's the kind of confidence that pays off in November and December when games get ugly. Now, a word of caution before Bills fans get too carried away celebrating. This was a thud practice, meaning players weren't tackling all the way to the ground. So some of those broken runs might not have gone for quite as much in a real live tackling scenario. And conversely, some plays that looked ordinary in thud might have actually been more impressive with full contact involved. Context matters, but even with that caveat, the eye test said plenty. Buffalo's rushing attack proved it could take a punch and fire right back. And let's talk about why this Browns defense deserves so much hype in the first place, because it's about to become a serious storyline all season long. Cleveland's division is an absolute mess right now. Pittsburgh has a brand new head coach trying to find his footing. Baltimore has a brand new head coach doing the exact same thing. And Cincinnati is dealing with the same ongoing issues that have haunted that franchise for what feels like forever. That means the door is wide open for a team to step up and steal some surprise wins, and if the Browns can just stabilize things at quarterback, their defense alone could keep them competitive in basically every single game they play this year. Oh, and get this. The unit Buffalo's offense just battled through wasn't even at full strength. Their star middle linebacker, a reigning Defensive Rookie of the Year who led the entire team in tackles and topped all rookies in that category league-wide, didn't even suit up for this practice. Let that sink in. Buffalo tested itself against a defense that was already elite, and that defense was missing its top playmaker. Adjust your expectations for the Browns accordingly, because their defense might be legitimately scary this season. All right, let's pivot to the part of this practice that had jaws on the ground. The tight ends absolutely feasted. Here's the situation Buffalo was dealing with heading into this joint practice. Nearly half of their wide receiver room was unavailable. We're talking 4 out of 11 total receivers on the roster sitting out. That's a massive chunk of the passing game missing in action. So what did Buffalo's coaching staff do? They adapted. They leaned hard into 2 tight end and even 3 tight end personnel groupings. And it worked so well that Cleveland's defensive coaches were literally shouting out personnel calls, trying to keep up, scrambling to match bodies against these bigger multi-tight end formations. And once Buffalo settled into that look, it was an absolute clinic. One tight end used slick hand fakes to completely fool the Cleveland defense not once but twice, hauling in 2 separate touchdowns. Another tight end was left standing alone in wide-open grass, uncovered, not once but twice as well, cashing in on the defense's confusion. But the moment that's going to be replayed over and over, a 2-minute drill where Josh Allen dropped back on just the second play of the drive and uncorked a jaw-dropping deep shot to his tight end for what was essentially a 55-yard touchdown strike. The tight end on the receiving end of that dime admitted afterward that he had never in his life been that wide open on a football field, so open, in fact, that he almost had to remind himself to slow down and actually focus on making a tougher, more difficult adjustment to complete the play, because it felt almost too easy. This is a golden nugget for Bills fans to file away. When your law room takes a hit and your offense doesn't just survive but absolutely thrives, that says everything about the coaching staff's ability to adjust on the fly. And full credit where it's due, head coach Joe Brady clearly used this moment as a mini training exercise for his own staff. Think about it like this. This was basically a controlled simulation of what would happen if the Bills' top receiving weapons ever got banged up during the regular season. Instead of panicking, the staff leaned into what was working, tweaked the game plan mid-practice, and found success. In-game adjustments like that haven't really been tested much for this coaching staff before. Last year, in a certain lopsided blowout, personnel was rotating so heavily that it wasn't really a fair test of real-time strategic pivoting. This time, it was a clean, legitimate test, and by all accounts, the staff passed with flying colors. Now let's flip over to the defensive side of the ball, because while the tight ends were stealing headlines, the secondary had a much rockier outing. And there's one name that Bills fans need to keep a very close eye on heading into the regular season. For most of the practice, Cleveland's quarterbacks were content to dump the ball off underneath, avoiding testing Buffalo's defense over the middle or down the field. It wasn't until later in the session that Cleveland started pushing the ball more aggressively with intermediate throws. And that's when things got interesting for one specific Buffalo cornerback who was making his return to full practice reps after battling injury for roughly a week. He looked understandably a little rusty knocking off the dust, which is to be expected. But the more concerning trend, he struggled specifically against bigger, more physical receivers, and this was not some isolated one-off incident. There's a track record here. Bigger, stronger wideouts have shown an ability to box this cornerback out and win contested catch situations, largely because he's built with a slender, lean frame rather than the bulkier build some corners have. And here's why that matters so much heading into the regular season. Film doesn't lie, and opposing coordinators absolutely study tendencies like this. If this player locks down the starting outside cornerback job opposite Buffalo's other established corner, then defensive coordinators around the league are going to specifically target him with their biggest, most physical receiver on the roster, week after week after week. That's just how the NFL works. If there's a perceived weakness, it gets attacked mercilessly until proven otherwise. So how does a smaller framed corner fight back against that recurring problem? It all comes down to refined technique. When you don't have the size advantage, you have to make up for it with precision, timing your jump perfectly, tracking the receiver's eyes rather than getting locked onto his body, and recognizing the exact split second the receiver's eyes flick upward toward the incoming football. That's the tell. That's the cue elite technicians use to time their leap and swat the ball away instead of getting physically overpowered at the catch point. And in a small silver lining for Buffalo, this same cornerback actually flashed exactly that kind of high-level technique late in practice. In a tense 2-minute drill situation, he was tested in the corner of the end zone against one of Cleveland's bigger, more physical wideouts, and this time he read the ball flawlessly, timed his jump to perfection, and batted the pass away to prevent a certain touchdown. So which version of this cornerback shows up in the regular season? The rusty one getting boxed out, or the technician making highlight reel pass breakups? That's the multi-million-dollar question Buffalo's coaching staff needs answered before Week 1. Now let's talk about the position battle that might be causing the most anxiety in the entire building, the kicking game. Buffalo's kicker enters this preseason with a genuinely difficult situation on his plate. He connected on 3 of 4 field goal attempts in the preseason opener, missing just one that sailed wide right, respectable numbers on the surface. But then came this joint practice session, and by the sound of it, his day was rougher than the box score alone might suggest. He wound up hitting only 4 of 6 attempts in front of the coaching staff and a national audience of scouts and reporters watching closely. Here's what makes this situation extra fascinating. Every single miss from this kicker has been the exact same shape, not a hook, not an inconsistent pattern all over the place. Every miss sails just outside the right upright. That is not random. That is a mechanical, technical issue that repeats itself, which actually might be good news in disguise. A consistent miss pattern is often easier to diagnose and correct than wild, unpredictable misses in every direction. But it's still concerning, especially for a player who, before a serious injury interruption, was historically automatic, the kind of kicker who could go a week and a half of practice reps without missing a single kick. That level of previous consistency makes these recent misses stand out even more starkly by comparison. And there's a fascinating wrinkle buried in all of this that deserves way more attention than it's gotten. This kicker is operating with an entirely new supporting cast. He's working with a new holder this season, and last year he wasn't even kicking at all due to that lingering injury, meaning he never got the chance to build rhythm and chemistry with Buffalo's long snapper either. Think about how much precision timing matters in a field goal operation. The snap, the hold, the plant, the strike, it's a 3-man symphony that has to be perfectly in sync, and this trio is still very much in the early stages of building that chemistry from scratch. But here's perhaps the most eyebrow-raising detail of the entire breakdown. Insiders who've been watching this operation closely believe the timing on the snap-to-kick sequence might actually be running too fast. There's a real difference between a smooth, repeatable, efficient operation and simply rushing through the motion trying to shave off milliseconds. When a kicking operation starts prioritizing pure speed over rhythm and consistency, that's when technical breakdowns creep in. And a split second of unnecessary hurry can be the razor-thin difference between a kick sailing clean through the uprights and a kick tailing just wide right. With a kicker who has 0 training camp competition pushing him this summer, every one of these mechanical wrinkles is going to be under a microscope heading into the next preseason outing. And finally, let's wrap up with the return game because there's a fascinating subplot developing here too. Buffalo's presumed punt returner has been banged up and missing practice time, adding uncertainty to whether he'll even be available for the next game. And let's not forget, he also coughed up a fumble in the preseason opener. He recovered it himself, thankfully, but ball security is priority number 1 for anyone in a return role, and that miscue is still sitting on his resume heading into this next test. So who stepped in? None other than Buffalo's primary kick returner, taking first-team reps at punt returner as well, suggesting the coaching staff might be testing out a dual-threat return specialist. And in a fantastic behind-the-scenes twist, this same player opened up about a serious mindset shift he underwent this offseason. He described taking a hard look in the mirror, realizing the biggest opportunity handed to him by the coaching staff was on kick returns, and fully committing to becoming the best kick returner in the entire NFL, even admitting he'd personally prefer more offensive touches. but recognizing that special teams excellence is where he can provide the most value to this roster right now. That kind of self-awareness is rare, especially from a young player still fighting to carve out a role. Most guys entering the league will tell you they do anything to make it, but very few actually mean it when that anything means embracing special teams grunt work instead of glory touches on offense. This player backed up his words completely, and it might be exactly why he's now getting real reps at both return spots. A smart, valuable, roster-saving level of versatility for a team that needs every trustworthy weapon it can find. So where does that leave us? Buffalo's offense proved it can fight through adversity and adapt on the fly when the receiver room takes a hit. The tight ends look like an absolute weapon that opposing defenses are going to have serious trouble containing. But there are real, legitimate concerns bubbling under the surface. A cornerback who might get repeatedly targeted by bigger receivers all season long, and a kicker whose consistent directional miss and rushed operation timing could turn into a real liability if it's not fixed before games start counting for real. This is exactly why training camp and joint practices matter so much. It's not about who wins a scrimmage, it's about exposing the cracks before the real season starts so coaching staffs have time to fix them. Buffalo clearly has the talent, the playmakers, and the depth to make serious noise this year. But these camp battles prove that even a Super Bowl contender has homework left to do before kickoff. So Bills Mafia, here's the question of the day. Are you more worried about the cornerback situation or the kicking game heading into the regular season? Drop your thoughts down in the comments below. I read every single one of them, and I love debating this stuff with you guys. If this video kept you locked in, do me a huge favor and smash that like button. It helps this channel more than you know. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe and turn on that notification bell because we've got daily coverage all camp long, all season long, breaking down every single storyline that matters for this football team. Thanks for watching, Bills Mafia. I'll see you in the next one.